Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the 2034 World Champion Buffalo Wings. We are at the beginning of the 2034 to 2035 off season. Last episode, we did a deep dive into our roster and our performance last year and our initial plans for this off season. And in this episode, we're going to start executing on those plans, also do a deep dive into our farm system, and then take a look back at some former players and some former prospects around the league and check in how they all performed over the last year or so, where their careers are going, where we've made mistakes, where we've made good moves, etc., etc., etc. Before we get into that, we have completed a couple of trades. One is going to be a name that's familiar to those of you who watched the World Series against the Toronto Blue Jays. And I really like this trade. You may remember the name Jesus de Santiago. He ended up being Toronto's starting catcher during the World Series. And he's actually a guy who never even played Major League Ball this year. So my belief is that Toronto likely had multiple injuries to their catchers during the early stages of the playoffs, because the only playoff series he appeared in was the World Series, but he did play all 7 games there. He's not a star. He's going to struggle to hit at the major league level. He's average defensively, though he does have a good arm. But he's durable. And most importantly, he's got 3 option years left. And we traded him, and we were able to get him straight up for Henry Allen, who is a decent hitter. But he has spent most of the last few seasons in Albany with us, or much of the last few seasons in Albany with us after we picked him up. I believe we picked him up originally as a Rule 5 guy. Yeah, we picked him in the Rule 5 draft in 2031, so we kept him on the roster all of 2032. And then the last 2 years, he's been more of a 4A guy for us, back and forth between Buffalo and Albany, not getting regular playing time. He's 28 years old. And importantly, he just completed his last option year. So we weren't going to have the opportunity to easily option him to AAA this season. He'd have to go through waivers. We could lose him. Also would have to protect him in the Rule 5. Not that we would necessarily care too much if we lost him that way. But this is the type of trade that I do like to do frequently. Once a marginal player is out of options, if I can flip them for anything of value, I do it. Most often. And in this case, to be able to help with a position of need with De Santiago, who should be starting likely as our AAA catcher, but we could play in the major leagues as a pinch. He has hit over 300 in the last season and a half that he's spent in AAA in the Toronto organization. So viewed that as a really good trade when I shopped Henry Allen. Shopped a couple of our other players in a similar situation. The corner infielder / corner outfielder Vaughn Necker and the former Rule 5 pitcher David Aranya, who are also now out of options. And unfortunately, there was no one nearly as interesting as Jesus de Santiago that I'm able to get for them. We'll still look to maybe try to include them in a package, but probably not going to get much value from them. But I will be inclined, if we can't get anything for them, to ultimately just release both Aranya and Necker, since we don't have options to get them to the minors easily anymore. And they both are very unlikely to be on the 26-man roster, given their abilities at this point in their careers. I feel better off just getting the $720,000 placeholder off our finances to give us a little more money to potentially bring on players who can help us at the major league level next year. So that was a trade that I've completed. And if you're looking closely, you'll see that I've been going back and forth with Philadelphia. And I do have a trade accepted. As we talked about at the end of our last episode, felt like we had 4 potential things we wanted to do this off season. A pitcher who could start for us if we needed, a catcher, third baseman, and a corner outfield who's a left-handed bat. And we handled the pitcher situation by exercising the $10 million option on Andrew Painter, who either will be a 4th or 5th starter for us, or hopefully an arm that can give us over 100 innings out of the bullpen, depending on how we use him. So we're pretty happy with our pitching staff and don't think that there's anything else we need to do there. And we do have some potential money, $25 million-ish to spend at this point. That'll probably be a little higher when we potentially trade or move on from players like Aranya and Necker, and hopefully sign some arbitration-eligible players to a bit less than the placeholder in the game. So the holes we still have to fill with that money are catcher, third base, and a left-handed hitting corner outfielder with a decent bat. And I think I've got a trade in place that could really help us with the catcher situation. It's not a cheap trade. We would be getting rid of Nate Kimmel, who right now is slated to be our 4th outfielder. He was a 3rd-round pick back in 2028. He's hit over 300 each of the last 3 seasons in AAA Albany. Hit 271 in 129 at-bats this year in Buffalo when he made his major league debut. He's never going to hit for much home run power, never going to draw many walks, and he doesn't bring much to the table defensively. That said, he looks like a good contact hitter with speed on the base paths. But right now we've got Tyreek Hardage and Tim Gaglia, who are also young, right-handed hitting outfielders. And I think those players are clearly both better defensively. And I like their bats better because they're a little more balanced with some home run power. And I just don't know that we need a third right-handed bat in the outfield, particularly one who's not going to hit for much power and not play particularly good defense. And we can straight up get catcher Walt Miller from the Philadelphia Phillies. He is not great, but he did hit 283 this past year with 11 homers and 254 at-bats when he was making his major league debut. He's above average defensively, above average arm, and you can see that that bat is decent. And my thought is between him and Andres Medina, that probably settles our catcher position for the next couple years. Miller's making the major league minimum for the next couple seasons, since he's only got 1 year of major league service. And I think conceivably Miller might end up our starter over Medina, given his different bat or his better bat. And then we'd potentially bring in Medina regularly as a late inning substitute, and then the starter when Miller needed a day off. It's also conceivable that we would just start Medina against left-handed pitching, though. But I think that it's a position that we have a lot of concern at right now because Medina is only our only proven major league catcher. But with the trade for De Santiago for a guy that we were likely to move on from anyways, and then potentially bringing on Walt Miller, I think we get much younger at catcher and much better at catcher and a lot more flexibility if we have some injuries with De Santiago and the AAA holdover Eric Powell in the minor leagues, ready to help if we do have any injuries. So I don't think Walt Miller's a star, but he's a decent bat with an above average glove. And I think at this point, when we look at what Walt Miller is, he's certainly better than what Adley Rutschman was at the end of last season. And Kimmel's got some value, but not enough that I'm not willing to make this trade. So we're going to go ahead and bring Walt Miller on board. And what that lets us do is we've got Miller and Medina in some combination as our catchers for 2035. We've handled the pitching situation by executing the option on Andrew Painter. So as we get ready for the off season to begin, we've really only got 2 holes that we want to fill, and we've got almost $26 million to fill them. It's potentially a starting third baseman, but as we've talked about in previous episodes, we do, with the likes of Edwards and Hull, have the flexibility to fill the third base position with what we have on board right now. And then that left-handed hitting bat for the outfield to balance out our lineup a bit is the other thing that we need. So we've got plenty of money to attack the off season. We're not going to be going at the high end of the market. And we do still have the qualifying offer to our third baseman from last year, Cam Collier. I don't think he'll accept it. He's 29 years old. He's coming off one of his better seasons in the major leagues. And he says he's looking for almost $23 million a year for 6 years. But if Collier were to opt in for 1 year, he gives us a left-handed bat with a little bit of pop, which, as we've talked about, is something that we are looking for. And that would still leave us with hopefully enough money to pick up a veteran left-handed bat who could play right or left field for us against right-handed pitchers and give us a little more balance in the lineup. So feel like we've got a lot of financial flexibility. So it's time to start seeing what happens with the offers we've made to all of our arbitration-eligible players, and hopefully we can get them all back soon, in addition to Hayden Yinger, who we made a extension offer to as well. And looking at our minor league system and our top prospects, we rank middle of the pack. We're 15th out of 32 teams, which doesn't sound exceptional and certainly isn't exceptional. But I think we've got to be realistic in that we have recently traded away Kimmel. We traded away Dave Zapp, who was one of our top prospects during this past season, to bring on the pitcher Barajas. And we also, over the last couple of years, have brought guys like Sincere Shazier, Isidro Ochoa, Yohane Varejo, Steve Anderson, Joe Edwards, Tyreek Hardage, Tim Gaglia, and others up to the major leagues. So we've had a big influx of talent to our major league team out of our farm system over the last couple of years. So we're not as strong as we'd like to be right now, but I think it's because we've harvested a lot of the gains, so to speak. We've only got 2 top 100 prospects. Guadalupe Amezcua was a scouting discovery about 1.5 years ago. He's 18 years old now. Likely will get an opportunity to go to the DSL next year. He is ranked as the number 12 prospect in baseball, by far the top ranked prospect in our system. And then you'll remember Arturo Flores from our playoff push, an international free agent signing almost 5 years ago at this point, number 78 prospect in baseball. Had a monster season across 4 levels, A, High A, Double A, and Triple A last year, combining for 61 home runs across those 4 levels with, looks like about 135, 140 ribbies, some crazy number. He's got the captain personality. We still think there's more growth that can occur for him. He was on our 40-man roster, so we made the curious decision, similar to what the Blue Jays ended up doing with De Santiago, to have him on the major league roster throughout the playoffs, and he was actually our starting first baseman against left-handed pitching. He hit 250 in 24 at-bats during the postseason, so he didn't embarrass himself at the major league level, although he did not hit a home run during the playoffs. We'll likely be starting the year in AAA next year, but another part of the reason we were okay moving on from Kimmel is we've got a big bat in Flores who's going to be playing a similar-ish role as a corner infielder slash DH. Kimmel, granted, had the flexibility to also play corner outfield, but feel like Flores is an upgrade there. And then you can see we've got 4 other prospects ranked in the top 200. Alexis Mendoza is a starter we picked in the 4th round in 2032. Like the way he's developing in terms of his potential 3 to 4 pitch arsenal, his stuff, movement, and control, not that far off major league at this point. That said, he hasn't been incredibly productive in the minors. Spent most of last year in A-ball, where he was 6-4, but a 5.05 ERA. The control an issue with 64 walks and 82 innings. Hopefully he can continue to get that straightened out. Teagan Tiley, you may remember we drafted 1st round, 23rd overall out of Canada back in 2031. And he split this year between A-ball, high A, and double A Utica. Hit at least 282 at every level, combined for 21 home runs. Looks like he could be a interesting infielder for us down the line. Not going to be a great bat, but looks like he could, if he fully develops, have an above-average major league bat. A little bit of speed, a little bit of bunting ability, and the versatility to play 3 positions in the infield. Probably still a year and a half or so away from being ready for the majors, but Tiley is one of the prospects in our system who's closer to the majors. Steve Anderson, I guess I used him as an example of someone who was no longer considered a prospect, but I guess that's not accurate since he's on the prospect list. Hit 214 and 70 at-bats, but he is penciled in as our starting shortstop, at the very least against right-handed pitching next year for us. Jesus Rivera, international free agent signing from just over a year and a half ago. Hit just 220 in the Dominican League for us this year. Still think he is an interesting outfield prospect who could potentially be a pretty good defensive outfielder, a little bit of speed, and a bat that is potentially pretty useful if he fully develops. So like Rivera as well. A few other prospects, we won't go through all of them, but we'll highlight a few guys who are former higher draft picks. Tim Streets, starting pitcher, was a 4th round pick just this past year. Was 1-3 with an 8.37 ERA in rookie ball, but looks like he's only 19 years old. Still room for him to grow. Former 1st round pick Eric Barbarito, picked 34th overall in 2033. Has not done much in rookie ball. He improved this year to 5-3 with a 5.59 ERA. Still walking a ton of batters. Needs to get that control straightened out. Changeup doesn't look like it's going to develop, but still looks like he could be a 3-pitch guy and eventually have a role on a major league pitching staff. Speaking of former 1st round picks, Ben Elmquist was our number 1 pick this past year. 21-year-old, split the year between rookie ball and then got promoted to A-ball, where he hit just 226 and 62 at-bats. I think he quite honestly is a guy who could be better than Nate Kimmel, who we just traded away, with that better outfield range, a little more home run power. Still probably a few years away, but at 21 years old would think that he could move through the system relatively quickly for us. David Espinoza, another starting pitcher, 3rd round pick from back in 2032, split the year between rookie ball and A-ball. 2-2 with the 3.20 ERA when he did get promoted to A ball. Doesn't look like he's going to be a top end starter, but think he's got the prospect to be a fifth starter or a useful arm out of the bullpen potentially. Catcher Jorge Berrios, international free agent signing from 2032. Made his debut in rookie ball this past year where he hit just a $136. The potential home run power and the potential eye are the attractants with him. Everything else is kind of meh or worse. Average defensive catcher. Not sure what he's going to come. We're not sure what he's going to become, but he is still in our organization as well. Dan Repetto is a guy who dropped to the second round for us this past year. Hit .272 with 5 homers, 9 doubles in 114 at-bats in rookie ball. Think he could eventually be a useful major league player. Sam Owens is a guy that we've actually been looking to try to deal in some of these trades we've been working on. He can play catcher, first base, or third base, but not particularly adept at any of those positions, although with his 6'4" height, he's an acceptable first baseman defensively. Just don't think he's ever really going to have quite the bat that we want for a first baseman. Did combine for 12 homers and 58 ribbies in A and high A ball this year, but we would not mind including him in a trade if someone sees some value in him. Tylen Hotaling was a 5th-round pick this past year, hit .246 with 6 homers in his introduction to professional baseball as an 18-year-old. And then last but perhaps not least, Marquise Corprew, former 7th-round pick in 2031. Looks like he is trending towards becoming a reliever if he's going to be in the majors. Almost 22 years old. He was 0-5 with an 8.79 ERA in rookie ball this year. A very suspect prospect at this point. Was kind of a flyer that we took in the 7th round on a guy who maybe would become a starting pitcher for us, and looks unlikely that he's even going to be a major league reliever at this point. So those are some of the highlights. One other guy that I do want to touch on who's not listed is Jonathan Cruikshank. Picked him in the 2nd round in 2032. You may remember he was a two-way player who we thought was better as a hitter than as a potential pitcher. And we have kind of really limited his pitching this point. He only pitched in 1 game as a reliever this past year in rookie ball after being a starter the previous 2 seasons. Just looking at his pitching ratings, and I don't think he's ever going to develop into a useful major league pitcher, even on the relief side. So although we still have him listed as a two-way player and we still let him be used occasionally as a reliever, we're focusing a little more on seeing if we can develop his bat enough to potentially become a useful outfielder for us. Not totally giving up on the pitching, but you can see that even in rookie ball, they only used him once this year out of the bullpen. So uncertain what the future holds for young Mr. Cruikshank. And with the review of our minor league system, I won't say complete, but we reviewed some of the highlights. We'll now kind of move on to some of the players that we have talked about in the past, thought about drafting, drafted, traded away, traded back for, etc. And we'll begin with the guy who we admittedly considered taking over Deshaun Seifu, number 1 overall, the year that we picked Seifu. And that's Josh Blevins, who now has 2 years in the majors complete. He had a really nice rookie year, hitting .294 with 20 homers, but tougher season this past year, hit just .233 with 13 home runs and 50 ribbies for the Cubs. Was a below-average offensive player and below replacement level when his poor defense was factored in. So going for Seifu over Blevins, certainly a move that we are pleased with in retrospect many years later. A guy that we really loved in the draft in 2027, and I know many of you who watch and comment really loved it all, was Roman Maples. And he is developing into an all-star shortstop for the Kansas City Royals. Hit 273 this year, 43 doubles, 7 triples, 15 homers, stole 13 bases, 115 WRC plus, and a 6.7 WAR, driven by his excellent defense as well. So Maples is a guy who we really liked in that 2027 draft. Unfortunately for us, with the second pick in the draft that year, we went for Ali Ostendorf, who has finally made his major league debut in Atlanta, viewed as the number 90 prospect in baseball. Still continue to love the personality, love the velocity on his pitches. His control has been our concern. And that kind of showed itself this year in Atlanta when he made his major league debut. He was 7-13 with a 5.08 ERA, working primarily as a starter, and he walked 74 batters in 118 and 2/3 innings. So clearly would have been better off taking Maples than Ostendorf with the second pick back in that draft in 2027. That said, the trade we made with Ostendorf got us John Featherston, who was our center fielder for several years before we moved on to the youth movement this year, and also got us Isidro Ochoa, who is a member of our pitching staff who should be playing a more prominent role down the line. So Ostendorf's future is still uncertain. He's almost 26 years old at this point. Don't know if that control is ever going to get much better than it appears right now. Still think with that arsenal of 5 above average pitches, he could be an effective major league pitcher, particularly with those ground ball tendencies, the high velocity, and the potential for borderline exceptional movement. And he's got a lot of value as a durable guy. But if he's going to be walking over 5 batters every 9 innings, it's going to be real tough for him to have sustained and consistent success at the major league level. Another guy that we really liked in a draft a few years later was the starting pitcher Mike Moore out of the University of Oregon, who ended up going to Seattle with the 22nd pick. We had the 23rd pick in that draft, and Moore would have certainly been a strong consideration had he been available. He's been in the majors for 3 years now, 10-6 this past year with a 2.04 ERA for the Mariners, allowed just 7 home runs in 141 innings pitched. He's got those extreme ground ball tendencies, really good movement on his pitches, put up a 4.1 WAR. I like our pitching staff, but clearly a guy like Mike Moore would make it potentially even better. But we didn't have the opportunity to pick him up. He was picked the pick before our pick. And in that 2031 draft, with that 23rd pick, we ended up picking Tegan Tiley, who we talked about. I think he could be a useful infielder for us, and a potential starter at probably more likely second or third than shortstop for us. So we didn't do bad with our pick, but Mike Moore would have certainly been more impactful at the major league level at this point. But Tiley is also 3+ years younger than Moore, so still plenty of room for Tegan Tiley to produce for us at the major league level or generate some value for us as a trade chip. And in that same 2031 draft, I know that some viewers liked Ben Pickle, the college player out of Minnesota State University, Mankato. He ended up going 28th overall. Splint last year in AAA Lexington, where he hit 314, 50 doubles, 24 homers, 4.1 WAR for him. He's a corner outfielder. If his home run power continues to develop and gets to be slightly below average, he'll definitely have more potential value and could be a potential decent starter as a left or right fielder if that home run power kind of stays more in the 45 range than the 55 range. In a perfect world, he's probably better off as a fourth outfielder or maybe a platoon guy who only plays against right-handed pitching. But looks like he could have a decent major league career. But at this point, I would prefer both Moore and Tiley to him from that same draft. And perhaps not surprisingly, they both went before Pickle in that draft. And Mike Goodwin is a guy who I once described as a poor man's Deshaun Seifu, and here, 6 years after he was drafted 18th overall, I still stand by that assessment, although as some of you noted, he does draw more walks than Seifu does. Pretty much everything else he's worse than Seifu in terms of his contact, his gap power, avoiding strikeouts. His speed isn't even quite as good on the base paths, and he's certainly not as good defensively. Hit 211 this year for the Angels in 332 at-bats. Did have 10 doubles, 9 triples, only 2 homers. 30 for 37 on the base paths, a bit above replacement level, but has been a bit disappointing, I would say, in terms of his offensive production. That said, he's still only 25 years old, and our scout thinks he can get a bit better from where he is today. He also does have a great personality, which I do tend to perhaps overvalue compared to others who play this game. And one final prospect to check in on, Dave Zapf, who we picked 5th overall in a draft, I think probably 6-ish years ago at this point. If I had to guess, it would have been 2028. Yep, 2028. Picked Zapf 5th overall. He was one of the key players in the trade that we made to bring on Alexis Barajas, who we hope will be a ace for us for many years to come, and was the winning pitcher in Game 7 of the World Series, which we'll never be able to take away from him. Zapf went right to the majors with Miami after they traded for him. He hit 238, 7 doubles, 2 triples, 4 home runs, and 164 at-bats. Was a bit below average offensively. Still has a lot of potential development that our scout thinks can take place. So still think he will be a pretty useful and productive major league outfielder. But he was a price that we were willing to pay to bring on Mr. Barajas. And speaking of the price that we were willing to pay to bring on Mr. Barajas, if I could spell properly, we also had to include Drake Purvis in that trade, a pretty good major league pitcher. And he was 7-4 with a 4.29 ERA after we traded him to Miami. And while we are in this swirling mess of how we got to ultimately get to Alexis Barajas, we've got to go back to Sabatka, who we used in a trade to pick up Purvis after Sabatka suffered that injury early in this season. And after he came back from the injury, he did some rehab starts in AAA and then pitched 8 games for Nashville at the end of the season. Was 2-2 with a 3.60 ERA. So he looks like he may be able to come back and be a productive major leaguer. I like where we are with Barajas instead of Sabatka in the rotation. I do worry about that third pitch being below average. I worry about his movement being below average now, and his stuff is certainly not exceptional. Seems like that injury did take a little bit out of Sabatka. But Both he and Purvis are still very useful and valuable major league pitchers. I just don't think that either one of them is as good as Alexis Barajas. So happy to have Barajas on the team, even if we had to ultimately get rid of both of them, as well as many other players to make that transition happen. And Marcelo Meyer, our former shortstop, is headed to free agency. Nashville declined the 33 million-ish, I believe, option that they had for him for next season. He's wrecked physically, hit just 220 and 245 at-bats for Nashville this year. Still looks like he is more than competent defensively. Still looks like a good, solid defensive infielder with a bat that could be okay whenever he's healthy. Be interesting to see what type of attention Meyer gets in free agency with that glove and that left-handed bat. If he was looking for a reasonable amount, we'd consider bringing him back, given our need at third base. But I think he still may be a bit delusional about his value. Yeah, I mean, it looks like he's expecting about $15 million a year. That's certainly not a number that we would be likely to go to for Marcelo Meyer. Jace Barofin, who was the first round pick in the history of the Buffalo Wings franchise. We traded him to the Yankees 4 years ago. His first 2 years with New York was incredibly productive. His last 2 years, he's kind of become what he was with us, a bit above average offensive player who certainly, when you roll in competent defense, is well above replacement level. Honestly, with the left-handed bat that he has and the ability to play either left or right field, he kind of fits the profile of what I think we need for a third or fourth outfielder, depending on how you look at things. Bolig is our left fielder. We've got Hardage and Gaglia, who will be playing in center, and probably sometime, depending on what types of pitchers we're facing, potentially in right or left as well for one of them. But a left-handed bat to kind of layer into the lineup with Hardage and Gaglia wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Still got 1 year left on that contract that we signed him to 5 years ago. I don't think he's our top priority. Hopefully we can do something in free agency, but I won't rule out pursuing a reunion with Barofin with the expectation that we would play him primarily against right-handed pitching if the price is not excessive and we can't find a better option in free agency or on the trade market. Mentioned that John Featherston had been our center fielder for several years after we traded away Ali Ostendorf for him and Ochoa. We moved on from Featherston this past year with the young center fielders Hardage and Gaglia ready for the majors. And Featherston hit 225 with 9 home runs and 524 at-bats for the Dodgers. He's going to be turning 31 shortly. Did steal 17 bases in 20 attempts, but was still a well below average offensive player who was above replacement level thanks to his excellent range in center field. And Gavin Grahovac was a utility guy that we liked. We had him on the team, but we included him also in the trade that brought us Alexis Barajas. He struggled with more regular playing time with Miami, hit just 217 and 249 at-bats. Did have 12 doubles and 9 home runs, drove in 31, but was still a below replacement level player in his limited tenure with the Marlins. And last, but certainly not least, to check in on is Vance Honeycutt, a longtime outfielder for us. I believe he was a 7th round or 8th round draft pick out of UNC, who turned into a very productive offensive player for us for several years. But his last 2 years with us, his batting averages had really dipped, and he was just a bit above average in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus. His first year in Atlanta, he was basically a league average offensive player, hit 250 with 16 homers and 488 at-bats. Did remain very proficient on the base paths, stealing 37 bases and 40 attempts. When all is said and done, he was a 2.3 WAR player, though, making $16.4 million. Although we are paying Mr. Generette an average of $40 million a year, and we paid him $50 million this past year in a contract that was slightly front-loaded, with Generette having taken over for Honeycutt and having led the National League in runs batted in, and having, even more importantly, just won the World Series MVP award for our championship team. We think the additional money that we invested in Shamar Generette while letting Vance Honeycutt go this past off season was well spent. And with that, it's time to get the off season rolling and see what happens with the contract offers we've made to our arbitration eligible players. We've got offers out to all of them, and we've got long-term offers to Bolig, Hull, and Carrillo. So hopefully we can get those guys locked up for several years, and then get Barajas, Estrada, Veliz, and Medina locked up for next season as well, in addition to the 3-year deal with some team options that we're offering to Hayden Yinger to hopefully remain an important contributor to our bullpen. So feeling pretty good about where things stand with the option that we exercised on Painter and the trade for the catcher Miller. Feel like there's really only 2 potential holes we need to address this offseason. And as I said, we're probably going to be going in with $28 million when all is said and done to potentially address those holes in the lineup. So I think that we're in a pretty good position to get this team looking the way that we want it to look for 2035 when we try to defend our title. And we are starting to get some of our players signed. Tim Hull, who we view as likely more of a super utility guy for us than the starting shortstop he's been since he came up to the majors. Did get him signed to a 7-year deal for $36 million total with a couple of team options. If he ends up needing to fill a starting role for us, I think it's pretty good value, even as a utility guy, given that he is a utility guy who's pretty good defensively, can play a lot of different positions, and has a not embarrassing major league bat. I don't think it's a bad contract, so happy to have Hull locked up at this point. We also signed Estrada to a 1-year extension to avoid arbitration. Same thing with Barajas, which fans are pleased with. Same thing with Andres Medina, which fans are pleased with. And then we got the longer-term extension signed for Jorge. Actually, it was not a longer-term extension for Jorge Carrillo. I was wrong. We only offered him the 1-year deal because we wanted him to prove it. So I think Estrada was the long-term contract, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Yes, we've got the two-way player Estrada signed to a 7-year, $121 million contract. Gives us another left-handed bat in the lineup, albeit one without any power, but also gives us a potential 3 or 4 starter. Bought out his final 3 years of arbitration, along with potentially, or his 3 years of arbitration, not his final 3 years of arbitration. Although I guess it technically was, because it looks like he was up a little earlier. So he actually was one of the guys who ended up with 4 arbitration years. So bought out his last 3 years of arbitration, plus potentially 4 years of free agency if we want. We do have team options on a couple of those seasons to give us a little bit of protection. So Estrada and Hull signed to long-term extensions. Barajas, Medina, and Carrillo back for a year, along with Juan Veliz. And looks like Bobby Bolig. So everyone is signed at this point among our arbitration-eligible players. Bobby Bolig also got the long-term deal signed with him. 9 years, $138 million, and buying out his arbitration years as well as several free agency years. Have the 2 team options at the end if the contract isn't working out quite the way that we hoped. But with the way that he has hit for us, particularly in the playoffs, even though he basically only plays against right-handed pitching for us in a perfect world, I think that is still a good deal for us. So it's only November 9th, and we've got nobody left that's arbitration eligible. Will be interesting to see what happens with the qualifying offer we gave to Cam Collier, and still waiting to hear whether Mr. Yinger will be back with us next year or not. And Yinger is now signed also to a contract that may let him play out the remainder of his career in our bullpen, averaging $1.5 million a year over 3 years. But we do have a team option for the final season. I think that although he probably doesn't quite have the stamina we'd want for a starter at this point, he could still give us 4 innings as a starter if we needed to. Still has a solid 3-pitch arsenal, but more likely we're hoping that he will be a high-end arm in our bullpen for the next few seasons, not making a ton of money. And although we did not have any Gold Glove winners this year, not surprisingly, we had given our great bullpen the top 2 vote getters for the Mariano Rivera Award. Our closer, Bryce Miller, finished second in the voting despite 43 saves and a 0.88 ERA. And that is because our stopper, Lorne Walborn, was a unanimous winner of the Mariano Rivera Award. Had a spectacular season for us. League best 87 games pitched, league best 33 holds, struck out more than a batter per inning, and he pitched 150 and a third innings out of the bullpen with a 2.16 ERA, 4.7 WAR on the season for Walborn. And he also was really good for us in the playoffs, and he ended up picking up the save in Game 7 of the World Series when he struck out the final batter to clinch the victory. Admittedly, after giving up a 3-run home run on the first pitch he threw to Michael Harris II, but he still got the job done in the top of the 9th against Toronto when all was said and done. And another former Buffalo Wing, Cade Smith, finished 4th in the voting for the National League Mariano Rivera Award. And we've also got a couple of Silver Sluggers this year. Shamar Jenneret, who we've talked about, not a surprise at all after leading the NL with 125 ribbies, hitting over 300 with 39 home runs. He, as we have talked about, was a huge addition to our team. And I was also very happy to see that Deshaun Seifu got some recognition, despite the fact that he is not really a slugger. He is a great hitter, and feel that he's a bit unrecognized, but he just won his 2nd Silver Slugger after a season during which he led the National League in at-bats, hits, doubles, triples, steals for the 7th consecutive season, and put up a team best 6.2 WAR. So although he hasn't been an All-Star or a Gold Glove winner since 2029, nice to still see Seifu get some recognition for the excellence of his career. And in what should be a shock to those of you who have watched some of the decisions that I have made while managing out games, named the National League Manager of the Year here for a fourth consecutive season. So despite my shortcomings, the voters are impressed with the team that I've put together as a general manager, and they are willing to ignore my sometimes frequent managerial miscues and have named Old School Sports the Manager of the Year for the fourth consecutive time in the National League. And although we did end up with a Manager of the Year award, the two Silver Sluggers for Jenneret and Seifu, and the Mariano Rivera Award for Mr. Walborn. We did not win any of the two big awards, or either of the two big awards. AL Cy Young Award goes to Chris Lenig of Seattle, 18-7 with a 2.05 ERA. Looks like a pretty incredible season, and you're going to need an incredible season to outduel his teammate Jesus Espetia in the Cy Young Award voting. Espetia had won 3 in a row before this season and was still 17-5 with a 2.31 ERA, but he came in second behind his teammate Ricky Tiedemann, who you remember we faced off against in the World Series, finished fourth in the voting. In the National League, Walbert Urena, 12-7 with a league best 2.38 ERA and a 5.8 WAR, is your National League Cy Young Award winner. Luis Larrea of the Braves, who was 16-10 with a 2.78 ERA and 300 strikeouts, was the only other guy who got first place votes. Alexis Barajas and Lorne Walborn from our Buffalo team finished 4th and 5th in the voting, and Jorge Carrillo with his league best 21 victories looks like he finished 7th in the voting. So 3 Buffalo Wings with votes for the NL Cy Young Award this year. Looking at the AL MVP, Michael Harris II, who terrorized us in the playoffs at times, won the American League MVP, but it was a very split vote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 players received first place votes, which is just crazy, including also Gunnar Henderson, who we faced off against in the World Series, although he struggled in the playoffs. Roman Maples, who we've talked about. Lenig, who won the Cy Young Award. Damian Bergman, who's going to be a free agent at catcher. We thought about picking up before the trade deadline, but the price was just too high. But Michael Harris II, 289 batting average, 25 homers, 30 steals, 139 WRC plus a 6.7 WAR. Very good defensive center fielder who was productive offensively. Gets the MVP award for the 5th time in his storied career. And in the National League was a very different situation. Kendall Pearsall of the Mets, the center fielder, was a unanimous winner. Hit .315, 34 homers, 107 ribbies, league best slugging percentage in WRC plus, and a league best 8.1 WAR for the center fielder. And I guess I can't complain about Seifu not getting any credit and attention anymore, because Deshaun Seifu finished 2nd in the MVP voting this year. So glad to see the voters recognize his very unique skill set. We've talked about him extensively, so no need to go deeper, but glad to see him win a Silver Slugger, and the 2nd place finish in the MVP voting for Seifu is the highest he's ever been. Shamar Jenneret, a year after winning the AL MVP, finishes 4th in the NL MVP voting. Mike Heiner follows up his 2033 Rookie of the Year campaign by finishing 6th in the MVP voting here in 2034. And a lot of other Buffalo Wings also got some attention. Bobby Bolig got some votes. Alexis Barajas got some votes. And two-way player Juan Estrada got some votes. And even Lauren Walborn, our Mariano Rivera winner and stopper, got some MVP support. So not surprisingly, when you've got a 112-win season and some big-time players on your team, a lot of attention among the voters for the Buffalo Wings this year, and a few awards actually won, which we have already talked about. And with the arbitration hearings behind us and awards season behind us, we're on the verge of free agency, and Cam Collier has declined our qualifying offer, so he is going to become a free agent. I think there's still some chance that we'll engage with him, since third base is one of our needs. But at the very least, we should be getting some draft pick compensation back for the loss of Collier, which will not be the worst thing in the world. And we've made it to the free agency filings, so let's see what the international free agent class looks like this year on a very quick review and a high level. Sung-Min Kim out of South Korea looks like a decent relief prospect, but not particularly exciting. Ooh, we need a third baseman, and there is Tadayuki Segakuchi out of Japan. He is a left-handed hitter, which we could also use. He's durable. He's looking for $21 million a year. I don't think he's a $21 million player. We'll still request a scouting report on him to get to hopefully know him a little bit better, but to me the demand there seems a bit excessive. Shortstop Luis Masonet, already signed with the Chicago Cubs. Looks like a decent glove, not much of a bat. And other than that, not too much interesting out there. So if we're going to be improving the team in free agency, it's likely going to be by the experienced Major League Baseball free agents. Joey Moore, who was on our team last year, about to hit free agency, just didn't need him back. We picked him up in the trade with Boston. He helped us win a World Series, but he's looking for a lot of money. Jackson Merrill, second baseman. Think he's going to cost too much money, and he is wrecked physically. Kyle Tucker, 37 years old, is a left-handed power bat, but probably at $24 million, looking for more than we're going to want to pay. Javier Santos, we don't really need a starting pitcher at this point, but he is certainly a good one. Damian Bergman, we don't really need a catcher at this point. We knew he was going to be looking for wacky money, given that he's probably the best defensive catcher in baseball, and he's got a pretty good bat. But we have settled our catcher position with Miller, Medina at the major league level, and De Santiago and Powell likely in AAA next year. Andres Jimenez, the veteran second baseman, a guy who's wrecked, looking for mid-20 millions, probably not the answer. Anthony Volpe, fragile physically, looking for a little over $20 million. I'd consider bringing him on board if the dollar figure gets a little bit more reasonable to potentially be a pretty good defensive third baseman for us, or maybe even take over as second for Seifu and move Seifu to third. He would give us some more optionality in the infield. Juan Soto, clearly a veteran left-handed hitter, still has some pop in his bat with 25 homers last year, but looking for almost $30 million a year for a one-dimensional slugger. Colton Sims, we could certainly use a third baseman, as we've talked about. Don't love the dismal range. He's also looking for over $34 million a year. And then our old buddy Cam Collier, his demand's even more than the 23-ish he was asking for from us. Says he's looking for 26.7 now, so no question, no surprise that he declined our qualifying offer. So I don't feel like there's any perfect fits for what we are looking for. Third base is not as urgent of an issue as a left-handed hitting bat in the outfield. I'm still somewhat intrigued by the veteran James Wood, who is looking for a lot less money than most of the other guys. He's fragile physically, which I don't love, but he is a competent corner outfielder, still a reasonably proficient base runner, and more than reasonably proficient last year when he was 29 for 30 stealing. He's been caught only twice on the base paths in 57 base stealing attempts over the past 3 years, and he's been nabbed only twice. So he is pretty efficient at base running, and he's got a little pop in his bat. I think we'd primarily use him as a corner outfielder against right-handed pitching, and then a dangerous bat off the bench for days when left-handed pitchers happen to start. Given that we've also got Bobby Bolig, who fits a similar profile as a corner outfielder, not sure exactly how well that would work, but as I've talked about, I would like to add a left-handed bat, and if we can't do it in the trade market, James Wood doesn't seem a horrible way to think about doing it in the free agent market for a short-term deal. Third base, Sims, Merrill, and Collier are the three prizes of the class, and they are all very expensive. Probably not a realistic option for us with any of them. As I've talked about, I would consider Volpe if the price comes down, maybe even not necessarily as our third baseman, but he could give us the opportunity to move somebody like Seifu to third and maybe play Volpe at second. Obviously Volpe is not a third baseman at this point, but I think with his skill set, we'd be able to get him competent at playing the position in the off-season and spring training if we wanted to. Don't love that he's fragile physically, though, and also don't think we can quite afford $21.5-ish million for him. We've got a little bit more than I anticipated, $29.2 million that we can potentially spend here. And we've got a decent amount available if we want to sign players to longer-term contracts. So we've got a lot of financial flexibility to potentially fill the two holes that we want to fill at third base and a left-handed hitting corner outfielder. So I think we're going to have some options in free agency. Getting that Adley Rutschman money off of the books has opened up a decent amount of financial flexibility for us. And we're going to need it because we are below average, 18th in terms of our budget. We're 21st in player payroll right now. That number will go up as we're hoping to spend a good chunk of the 29-ish million that we've got to spend this year, but want to spend it prudently as well. But I think we are well positioned to be a very competitive team on the field again in 2035. And we'll find out what we do in free agency and the trade market and eventually the Rule 5 draft in our upcoming episodes. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.